Ladies and gentlemen, MrCropper here, joining Charles 2, Functional Philosophy number 4, Evil Without a Mustache.
Welcome to Functional Philosophy. I'm Charles 2. That's T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. This is episode number 4, and its title is Evil Without Mustache Twirling. Many people find that they hold two irreconcilable beliefs about their hated ideological enemies. One of these beliefs is that the enemy is too consistently wrong to simply be mistaken. His wrongness being a moral failing is what elicits the hatred, after all. The other belief is that intentional evil doesn't exist. No one sets out to do evil. The people who make up the enemy can't really be indifferent to injustice.
Steph Molyneux strikes me as the guy who says that intentional evil can't exist. It's just because you were beaten when you were a child, right? Psychobabble.
Have the destruction of the country or the world as their goal, even if their policies seem perfectly designed to achieve those ends. They can't be so stupid as to not know what they're doing, but that would make them knowingly evil, and that seems psychologically impossible. So what's going on? Well, let's take Barack Obama as an example. I'm using him as my example because I hate him, but he also has the advantage of being the former president, and therefore an example all of you will be familiar with. You can substitute Donald Trump or whoever you like, or rather don't like, in your own mind. So, on the one hand, some people think, Obama can't possibly honestly believe, for instance, that government spending as such produces economic growth, that putting money in the hands of government bureaucrats creates more wealth than leaving it in the hands of private investors. The countervailing...
He can't possibly believe, he can't honestly believe that he's actually doing good by doing all this corrupt government garbage. And the same goes for a lot of these politicians. But why do they do it then? But it's like I was saying in the previous episode, if you saw. Maybe that wasn't in a previous episode, but they find themselves in this situation. I'm sure it was in another episode or two here. If they find themselves in this situation, and that's it. They're just handed this situation. Like you run for office and get into office, and there it is. There's the situation. What do? You're handed a bunch of millions of dollars, or the reins to hand the millions of dollars out. What do? You hand it out or don't you? Who do you hand it to? So it's just Obama got into office, and then he had the power to do all kinds of stuff. And what does he do? He does what he wants to, what he believes he should.
The evidence and logic, they think, are so overwhelming that he must have been deliberately making us poorer and destroying the country. Maybe some guy on the street could have this mistaken belief about economics, but someone...
Is that what the Soviets were doing, was deliberately making themselves poorer and destroying the country? No, but that's what they ended up doing. In fact, it occurs to me that anytime you put a group in power, they will deliberately destroy the country. And I don't know exactly why that is, but the other side is, how do you build the country? By keeping groups out of power, by just letting everybody do what they want to do, without groups, without a narrative.
Whose job involves understanding economics couldn't be this honestly ignorant. Obama was one of our most intellectual politicians, after all. He couldn't have done the studying and thinking, and ended up where he did on that issue. On the other hand, they think, mustache-twirling villains don't exist. Obama didn't look in the mirror on the day he decided to run for president and say, let's get this campaign for evil started. So, was he evil, or was he stupid? The answer isn't neither. It's both. He was evil so that he could be stupid enough to be psychologically capable of pursuing the policies he did. Now, I'm going to explain how this is done. Imagine you want to buy a car. You know how much you make each month, and you know how much your...
Now, I'll just say it must be done through evasion, right?
Bills are each month. You can do the math to figure out the kind of car you can afford, but not in your head. Now, I'm going to give you the conventional account of how this goes, and then the true account. The conventional account. You do the calculations and buy the car you can afford, even if it's not the one you really wanted. You know you can and should do the calculations, and once you do them, you know you can't afford anything more, so you irresistibly acknowledge reality and buy what you can actually afford. What else are you going to do? Think to yourself, I'm going to wreck my expenses and risk homelessness. No. But that's what would be required to act immorally and buy the car you can't afford. And no one thinks to himself, I'm going to do wrong. So all cases of spending more than one can afford must be due to ignorance. In this case, you know what you should do, and so you do it. There's no such thing as should have known better on this view. If we're to believe in Plato's depiction of Socrates, Socrates endorsed this view. His reasoning was most people's when they conclude that no one intentionally does evil, and it's that it is absurd to think that anyone can have in mind that an action is wrong and yet do it anyway. If it were wrong, why would he do it? Now, this would have been much more convincing to Socrates than to people today. It has a logic to it that's still inescapable, but people don't think of logic as absolute, first of all, and more than that, they're altruists. They see an obvious possible motivation for doing evil. Evil is selfish, and that is also self-evidently something you would do. Why would any self do anything that isn't selfish? So you have the moral thing, which seems self-evidently to be what you want to do, but also the selfish thing, which also seems self-evidently to be what you want to do. That's the modern viewpoint. This dilemma would not have had the same force for a Greek like Socrates, as the Greeks were egoists and didn't see any contradiction between the moral and the self-interested. That aside, the avowed evil-doer, the mustache twirler, still seems an impossible fantasy to people today. Since no one like that exists, they conclude, evil is a myth, an invalid concept based on a false distinction between mistake and malice. In reality, they believe, evil is just a name for a kind of ignorance that causes people to harm others through subsurface mechanisms which the superstitious identify as free will. I'll save an explicit discussion of free will for another episode.
So are the Democrats mistaken, or are they evil? That's the question I'm having in the back of my mind, seeing if his explanation's going to be able to line up with the Democrats being evil and mistaken. Are they mistaken because they're evil, evil because they're mistaken?
Get to the true account of the car buyer. The true account is that you could go either way. You could acknowledge reality and act morally and responsibly and buy only what you could afford, but that course of action isn't irresistible, even though you know it's right. A certain kind of person will experience trepidation at the thought of finding out how much he can afford. He may evade the fact that he should calculate what he can afford, and then guiltily buy the car he wanted without knowing if he can afford it. What the conventional Socratic account misses is that people don't have to keep in mind what they know. It's possible to evade, to switch your focus, to shut out what you know you should do, so that you can do what you feel like doing instead. You can indulge your emotions and spend money you're not sure you have.
We call that YOLO. You only live once, so you just do it anyway.
Think about the choices you make every day. Are you irresistibly pulled along according to what you know you should be doing? Have you possibly ever shoved your rational judgment aside by focusing on the urge you felt instead? Have you ever played video games when you knew you should be studying? Even if you haven't, you'll be able to see that you face that battle all the time, and it's possible to give in to temptation through evasion. Even if you did the calculations and figured out what kind of...
To give in to temptation through evasion. The one thing that I can remember strikes me most on that is the factory scene in Atlas Shrugged when they had just voted in the plan, and John Galt said he was going to stop it, and he left. He walked out, and we were an angry mob at that point. Too loud, too rowdy. Do you remember the guy's description of the situation? They had evaded reality and stepped across the line. They voted on it. They all got together in a group and voted on it. They didn't accomplish anything. They just decided as a group that they're going to force everybody to behave in the following way from here on out. That wasn't an accomplishment by any individual. That was a group decision.
car you could afford. You could evade that knowledge so as to become psychologically capable of buying a car you knew you couldn't afford. The problem is that it's harder to avoid focusing on an item of knowledge than it is to avoid gaining that item of knowledge. Once you have it, you can't make yourself believe it's untrue. Faith doesn't exist in the way people think it does. No one is capable of believing something without or contrary to evidence. Your mind has a nature, an identity. It works in a certain way.
No one is capable of believing anything contrary to evidence. That's the nature of your mind. So if you can prove the evidence to somebody, they will be compelled to believe it, right? Now, J.G. Chesterton, I think, said, you can't reason a man out of views he didn't reason himself into. If he accepts things on faith, they're saying, you can't reason him out of them. But what Charles too is saying is that the person who believes in these things on faith must have some evidence for them, if they're true beliefs, to the extent that it's a true belief, it has to be based on evidence from reality. Right? That's what he's proposing. You have to have evidence from reality to propose a true belief.
Without or contrary to evidence. Your mind has a nature, an identity. It works in a certain way. Just gaining that item of knowledge. Once you have it, you can't make yourself believe it's untrue. Faith doesn't exist in the way people think it does. No one is capable of believing something without or contrary to evidence.
No one is capable of believing something without or contrary to evidence. So evidence is required for belief. Now, on that view, if somebody really does believe something, they must have glimpsed some evidence. Now, they might be mistaken in their belief. They might be mistaken in what the evidence actually does prove, but they have evidence, they have a belief, they have evidence they believe would prove it, and they saw the evidence in reality. Does this constitute a belief in Mr. 2's system? Right? I think so. A mistaken view, to have a mistake in your view, means that you'll accept as evidence for conclusions, things which shouldn't actually be accepted as evidence for conclusions, and then you will trigger that part in your brain that says, this is true. Right? Now, that all we're saying, the only claim we're making is people aren't omniscient. That's really the only claim we have on the table at the end of the day. People can make mistakes in thinking. People are not omniscient. Right? So that is what faith is people who believe something and they aren't willing to consider the evidence because this has been proved to them through what they consider to be evidence. Okay? So that is a belief. Or does Mr. 2 completely dismiss these people as not having beliefs?
Mind has a nature, an identity. It works in a certain way. Just as you can't force yourself to believe that 2 plus 2 equals 5, George Orwell's 1984 notwithstanding, so you can't force yourself to believe that anything that you know is true is false. What's actually going on when someone acts on faith is evasion of knowledge so as to become capable of acting on what one doesn't actually believe.
Now, the best, strongest case I can give him there is that he has come to this person, Mr. 2 comes to a person who has a faithful belief, and Mr. 2 has given them the evidence otherwise. Like, for example, you go to a creationist and you show them, fossils or whatever it is, and they say, no, I'm going to continue with my view of faith. But I submit that they have glimpsed facts in reality, vindicating their belief, and when you bring to them one little piece, one little straw that says, this particular piece of your basket's very mistaken and very wrong, they say, well, it's a whole basket, and I'm not going to throw the basket away for a handful of straws. So they have, in what I'm suggesting is, they think that they have evidence for their faith. Now, I'm suggesting that in light of what Mr. 2 is saying as well. He's saying that you can't really believe something unless you have evidence for it. A belief means to have something that is confirmed by reality. And that's what really these people, these faithful people, feel. They have some beliefs that are given to them, and then they see them confirmed in reality. And then they come back and they look at the beliefs, and then they see them confirmed in reality. Back and forth, they see this. They see a rich person who, is faithful to his wife or whatever, a successful person who loves his children and doesn't drink his life away, or, whatever. And they can see that over time these principles have verifiable meaning. Verifiable. They work. These principles, these ideas, these facts, these are efficacious. They actually work. And so they come to have faith in them. Is that true? I mean, Mr. Charles, too, is proposing that they couldn't have these beliefs without them being verified in some way in reality, right?
You can't choose to disbelieve a conclusion you've reached. All you can do is...
So if they've reached that conclusion, they've been given the evidence. They've been given the base assumption. They're given the base assumption in Sunday school, let's say. And then as they go through life, they see again and again the evidence. And they can't escape the conclusion that this church is true, or that there is a greater power, or whatever the conclusion is that they're moved to. It's the case that they can't escape the conclusion. One of my listeners, Tony, who I've done a hangout with some recent time ago, said that there must be some God or creator. And he used to be fairly atheistic, but now he's back to the idea there is a God or creator. I think he used to be atheistic. I'm not really sure. Maybe he was always a believer. Maybe he was always a believer. But these people are moved to that conclusion through false assumptions. But the point is that it's evidence from reality that confirms, wrongly, their view, and that at the end they believe their view wrongly because they have evidence for their view, which is wrongly attributed, right? But they believe these things. So I'm just trying to make the case here that someone who has faith in a system is really just skeptical of throwing away something that they see to holistically adhere to reality.
Ignore it. Or you could have chosen to avoid the evidence or thought necessary to reach the conclusion in the first place. So a better solution for the evader is to evade the evidence and thought that will result in inconvenient knowledge. If he does, he can honestly claim not to know if what he fears is true. You could maintain...
Now that occurs to me as Rucka, who is trying not to look at the evidence that is being brought before him. And some of these other people who, when I talk about this evidence, they just get mad at me. They call me a racist. They say I'm on the white supremacist side. I'm all right. They go crazy because I'm looking at the evidence that the supposed enemy is putting on the field to justify their insane views. And I say, well, what's the evidence there? And they say, Cropper's looking at evidence. Oh my God, run for the hills. Cropper's a racist because he's looking at the evidence. So it's more convenient if you're just trying to stick with faith to some group. You're just trying to stay inside of your group and stay safe. It's better to ignore the evidence, right? And then you can pretend that doesn't exist, whatever it is, the evidence that you think is going to destroy your holistic worldview. I see Rucka in that right there.
Because he can honestly claim not to know if what he fears is true. All you can do is ignore it, or you could have chosen to avoid the evidence or thought necessary to reach the conclusion in the first place. So a better solution for the evader is to evade the evidence and thought that will result in inconvenient knowledge. If he does, he can honestly claim not to know if what he fears is true.
Now, we have a version of this in the Mormon Church, which is to distrust intellectuals. They downright say it. They just come out and say it. Intellectuals do the devil's work. Just don't listen to it. Just read your scriptures, go to church, read what's approved by the church. There's a list of books that you shouldn't read if you're a good Mormon. And it's thought control. Right? It really is thought control.
You could maintain that you might have enough money to buy the car you want, and as long as you don't calculate your income and expenditures, you really do have that status of ignorance. In fact, if you're bad at estimating, you may even be able to honestly believe that you likely do have enough money for the car, even if you don't. Once you do the math, however, there's no going back, and evasion becomes costlier psychologically, because you've reached a certainty regarding the question your action is supposed to turn on.
And then you can say something like, well, we'll make it work, right? You can still evade the facts. You can just think, well, we'll get a raise, or one of our other bills will go down, or we'll sell something.
If you refuse to ever do the math, you're free to say you honestly don't know the solution, and even to believe that the solution might be good news.
Now that's where I see Rucka with the race thing. He refuses to do the math. These people have brought this evidence to us, and they're sticking it in our face, and Rucka says, just call them racists and run out of the room. Well, do they have any evidence? I don't know. I don't trust it. You don't trust their evidence? Well, that's quite an interesting stand. Um, you're sure that it's useless? I don't know. I'm not sure. You're not so if you were certain that the evidence were good, then you would consider it. But you're in a state where you're not sure about whether the evidence is useful because it's compiled by people that you believe are questionable. So you're just not going to consider the evidence at all. They're looking at stuff that might be bad. Run! That's what I see Rucka doing.
So, what Obama does, to go back to him, is avoid thinking about economic or political ideas he doesn't like. That way, he can always believe himself when he says that what he's doing might work.
I mean, he said Obama, but I heard Rucka.
So, to say that Obama is evil and honest is not a contradiction. His immoral evasion is what allows him to honestly believe that certain things are possible. He doesn't think about the logical implications of what he's doing, so he never has to confront, in explicit terms, that what he's doing is destroying the world. In other words, he is dishonestly holding on to the status of someone who can honestly say he's making a mistake. That doesn't mean Obama isn't honestly making a mistake, but it does mean that he's being immoral by maintaining ignorance intentionally. The ignorance, the mistake, is real, but he knew he was putting himself in a position to make it. That desire...
So intentionally maintaining ignorance is a key, isn't it? To intentionally maintain ignorance is evasion, isn't it? To evade again and again and again. That's pretty damning.
To do what you want without having to know that it's wrong perpetuates and is perpetuated by the philosophy of skepticism. Bad philosophical ideas serve as rationalizations for evil, and that's the form in which they have their influence. The reason philosophy rules the world is that it legitimizes or delegitimizes certain motivations, certain psychological actions. In a rational world, reason is encouraged and faith is discouraged. In an irrational, skeptical world, philosophy acts to encourage bad behavior, like the type I've been discussing. Skepticism encourages faith. It makes all the difference whether someone like Obama can say, I'm okay avoiding those ideas I don't like. Even if I look at them, I can never be sure I didn't make a mistake.
You know, there are sections like that in Charles II where I think there's just a section, almost every video there's a section where he does that. Where he does what he just did there. He did like, every sentence there was an enormous claim. All fine, but very interesting and needing to be unpacked. Every one of them needing to be unpacked. Let's see what happens.
Evil and honest is not a contradiction. His immoral evasion is what allows him to honestly believe that certain things are possible. He doesn't think about the logical implications of what he's doing, so he never has to confront, in explicit terms, that what he's doing is destroying the world. In other words, he is dishonestly holding on to the status of someone who can honestly say he's making a mistake. That doesn't mean Obama isn't honestly making a mistake, but it does mean that he's being immoral by maintaining ignorance intentionally. The ignorance, the mistake, is real, but he knew he was putting himself in a position to make it. That desire to do what you want without having to know that it's wrong perpetuates and is perpetuated by the philosophy of skepticism.
Okay, see, that's a pretty big claim right there. The desire to do what you want is related to skepticism. Pretty big claim. Can we unpack that?
Bad philosophical ideas serve as rationalizations for evil.
Bad philosophical ideas serve as rationalizations for evil.
And that's the form in which they have their influence.
And that's the form in which they have their influence. Bad philosophical ideas are rationalizations for evil. That's how they affect us. Okay. Now that wasn't really related to the skepticism claimed before, I don't think. Or if it is, I'll need the line drawn.
The reason philosophy rules the world is that it legitimizes or delegitimizes certain motivations, certain psychological actions.
The reason philosophy rules the world is it legitimizes motivations or actions, or delegitimizes them. You see, those are three pretty disparate thoughts. I mean, on what level is two operating here? Is he operating on a level where these things are connected and I'm just not seeing them? They're like, is there strong connections between these things? Or is he just it's become the end of his video and he's just free associating a bit now? I mean, these things are fine. I mean, I can't see a problem with the claims. I was wondering what to say about them, except, can we unpack them? Can we understand them a bit more? I'm not sure I even understand what the claims are That's quite a claim. Skepticism does this, and these things are quite large claims.
In a rational world, reason is encouraged and faith is discouraged. In an irrational, skeptical...
In a rational world, reason is encouraged and faith is discouraged. True enough. Is that a premise for something that we're doing here? Did that follow from the previous three quite large claims? Okay, but it's true, it's fair enough. And in an irrational world,
philosophy acts to encourage bad behavior, like the type I've been discussing.
Okay, philosophy encourages bad behavior because you use it to rationalize. That kind of cattails to the earlier point. All right, fair enough. But, maybe I'm just on a slightly lower level than two. I don't know. Do you guys follow through? I mean, I'm not saying that the sentences weren't true. I'm just wondering what the connection is, because he's so good about connecting all of his stuff, but he does this almost every video. He's got several sentences where it's like, whoa.
Skepticism encourages faith. It makes all the difference whether someone like Obama can say, I'm okay avoiding those ideas I don't like. Even if I look at them, I can never be sure I didn't make a mistake in investigating them. I can never claim certainty about anything anyway.
Good. See, he's unpacking that one. Skepticism encourages faith. And then he goes about unpacking what he means, how Obama could act like a skeptic and therefore be able to maintain his faith.
So what difference does it make if I fudge things in my direction? What difference does it make if I act on faith that the ideas I want to be true are true? So it's true that no one says, I'm going to do evil. But the method by which he makes himself believe that the evil he's doing isn't evil is evil. And however much he tries to evade that he evaded, he knows somewhere in his mind that he has evaded.
Now, is that evil for him to I think there was that one step in there where I'm not sure if it's evil. I think it might be good intentions misunderstood. Let's see.
What difference does it make if I act on faith that the ideas I want to be true are true? So it's true that no one says, I'm going to do evil. But the method by which he makes himself believe...
Nobody says, I want to do evil. I'm going to do evil. I don't know. I don't think I can go that far. I doubt I can go that far. There are definitely people who say, yep, I'm going to do bad.
Believe that the evil he's doing isn't evil is evil. And however much he tries to evade that he evaded, he knows somewhere in his mind that he has...
Okay. Now, I wouldn't maybe put Obama in the camp that says I'm just going to do evil. He probably actually believes somewhere that it's ultimately better for the country to tamp down free market individualism and put forward communitarianism of some kind. He probably actually believes in a sick, twisted way, but he probably believes those things, and he probably sees them confirmed when people say, you would see evidence this were true if white people had most of the power positions. And then he looks around in society and, what do you know? White people have most of the power positions, therefore these things must be true. He's had confirmed these delusional things for him. So I think he might actually believe this stuff. Now, he might have to evade when somebody brings real evidence or a logical argument. He might have to evade that. But it's like he has a whole coherent worldview where everything's interwoven. You come and you offer him the idea that one of these bits is wrong, it doesn't fit. And he says, well, I'm not going to give up the whole thing for that one little point you're bringing to me. So I take exception to Mr. Two's idea there that these people, that it's evil here and then evil here and then evil here. I believe there's a step in there where it's like you have your belief that's been confirmed falsely, right? You had to get it confirmed falsely, so there's some evasion to get there. And then to implement it, you have to ignore the fact that it's not going to implement correctly the way you want to. You have to ignore the fact that your dreams of unicorns and ponies and flowers is not how it's going to be. It's going to be men with guns who carry out your dream once you get your dream in place. But you evade that too. You evade the problems there too. But I believe that there is a step here in the middle where they've falsely come to actually believe these things because of false assumptions to begin with. Now they're in a place where, as Two says, you can't actually believe something that you don't have evidence for, or also if once you have the evidence for it, you can't help but believe in it. And I believe they've gotten themselves into a place, painted themselves in a corner, if you will, by coming from this direction with a bit of evasion here and there. Ignore this because the community won't let you look at it, let's say, and dwell on that because your society demands that you do. And so eventually you come to some conclusions, and here you are, and you honestly believe those conclusions. Then you have to implement them. And then you go, okay, time to evade again, and you evade a little bit, and you implement your conclusions like Obama. So I just take exception to that little bit in there.
And however much he tries to evade that he evaded, he knows somewhere in his mind that he has evaded. And his subconscious...
So there is constant guilt with these people and their way of thinking. Their psychoepistemology is racked with guilt because they know that evasion is one of their basic means of going about. And you can tell these people are not self-confident when you talk to them. We all know this.
Conscious won't and can't let it go. So I'm going to end with this lyric from a song I like by Find Faulting. The evil on your mind, it pays you back in kind.
Take what you want, said God, and pay for it. Spanish proverb. Okay, well there we are at the end of that one. That was kind of juicy there, kind of interesting. All right, join me for Functional Philosophy number 5 in our next part 4, I guess it will be. Excuse me. And if you like what I do, please go to Patreon and throw me some money over there. And let me know if you have any questions. And I'll see if 2 has answered them. And if he's answered them, I'll go get his answer and I'll talk about his answer as well. Because that's fun. 2's great. Very few things to take exception to. Isn't that the case?